we're going to try to keep building upon that so you can have your one-on-ones with these decision makers.
Tonight, the National Chief defends his record of getting close with the Trudeau cabinet.
I think the challenge is how do we hold on to what we used to be, the tradition and language.
The shared Indigenous struggle of resilience in the face of colonialism. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. News out of the AFN's Chiefs Assembly this week was dominated by the national inquiry into murdered and missing women and girls and calls for the resignation of its Chief Commissioner, Miriam Buller. But a lot of other business occurred during the week. So before saying adieu to another AFN meeting, APTN's Todd Lamarand revisits some highlights.
Because of visa troubles, only one leader, Domingo Paez, of an Indigenous Ecuadorian delegation made it into Canada.
I thought I was all alone. Now I see all my brothers and sisters here, and I'm very happy.
He was here to create an alliance with First Nations. Back home, Indigenous people have been fighting Chevron for 20 years in court for polluting their environment with oil and toxic waste. They won, but Chevron has refused to pay.
And this jungle gives pure air for all of humanity.
Eso toca proteger entre todos.
This needs to be protected among everybody.
On the Minds at Summit, the Assembly is the pending passage of Bill S3 into law. Chief Ron Ignace expressed concern that it will restore status to those who lost it through sex discrimination in the Indian Act.
But they won't have funding, so we'll have two-tier system in our community. Those that have funds for various programs and those that will be living beside us won't have any funding, and it's going to cause disruption and disharmony in our community. So we have to deal with this issue.
Not everything happened on the Convention Hall floor. Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs leader Arlen Dumas, Ministers Jane Philpott and Carolyn Bennett signed a memorandum of understanding a short distance away. It's a promise to reduce the number of Indigenous children in care in Manitoba.
Today, a child is going to be separated from its mother. The work that we are doing today by signing this memorandum is going to mean that those children are going to come back home.
Back on the floor, National Chief Perry Bellegarde summed up the 3 days by defending his strategy of pursuing a close relationship with the federal government.
Remember back the last few years, you never saw ministers come. Tough to get meetings with ministers. So we have to have access to the ministers. And how they went to the caucus sessions, that was, we're going to try to keep building upon that so you can have your one-on-ones with these decision makers that make laws and policies that affect our rights.
Bellegarde's style will be put to the test next July. That's the next election for National Chief. Todd Lamarand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Paul Barnsley is a veteran journalist who's been covering Indigenous issues for decades. He's also executive producer of APTN Investigates, and he's been covering the AFN for us this week. He joins us now from our Ottawa studios. Paul, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. What was your sense of what the Chiefs are most concerned about?
I didn't see a lot of concern. I mean, there are pockets of Chiefs who are really leery of the work that's being done with the federal government. But generally, I saw a sense of optimism, of industriousness. The AFN is looking busy. There's lots to do. And some of the things that the government is saying are, very intriguing. But I think everyone, if there is any concern, it's that the hopes are going to get built up and then smashed again, as has happened so many times in the past. But I guess the subtext for the entire 2.5, 3 days is that election for National Chief that's coming up in July. And it's considered sort of bad form to be campaigning this early. The campaign is not officially on yet. Most of the candidates haven't declared themselves yet, although Perry Bellegarde did. But that opening address by the National Chief, if that wasn't a stump-style speech, I don't know what is. He spent a lot of time talking about his accomplishments, things that are in progress. I know his people close to him on the staff there and politically at the AFN were saying we have momentum, we need another term. So it's already started. But generally, it was an interesting 3 days. There's lots going on.
Paul, any other contenders stepping forward that you saw over this week?
Well, I have to tell you, I've been following this. My first AFN Confederacy was 20 years ago. So I'm highly suspecting that Sheila North is planning a run based on her very dramatic, if I use the word performance, that's probably not the right word, but her grilling of Marion Buller, the Chief Commissioner for the Missing Women's Inquiry, that was memorable, and it may well be she was attempting to raise her political profile. You don't get too many chances the way the AFN structure works to have all, or not all, but a lot of chiefs there. And people with ambitions will take note of that and will want to take advantage of that opportunity.
Paul, as you mentioned, there were some fireworks with the commissioners yesterday and some of the comments around that. What was the discussion? Was there much discussion today following the calls for the resignation of the Chief Commissioner?
Lots on social media last night. As you know, Dennis, the Confederacy wrapped up yesterday. It's a travel day for most of us. But I was intrigued to see that, you know, there's a lot of heat, but I got the sense that the Commission will attempt to brush it off. The federal government certainly didn't rush out there to comment on this. It's going to take a little more than what happened on Thursday to get the government's attention, I think. But at the same time, they are noticing that the pressure on the Commission is increasing.
Definitely. Paul, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, Dennis.
As you heard earlier, the number of Indigenous kids in care is at a record high, with some likening today's apprehensions to the 60 Scoop. Various groups gathered across Canada for a day of action to bring awareness to the overrepresentation of Indigenous kids in the system. Manitoba is known as ground zero for apprehensions. But as Brittany Hobson shows us, First Nations leaders are working with the federal government to change that.
These words rang out in cities across Canada on a day where groups gathered to call attention to the staggering number of Indigenous kids in care. The organization advocating for First Nation families in Manitoba spearheaded the day of action in Winnipeg.
We stood in unity across Canada. There was a day of action in Kelowna, in Vancouver, and Toronto, in Williams Lake, and the whole message was to bring our children home.
But the day was about more than just bringing awareness. It was about calling for change to the current system. In Manitoba, the First Nations Family Advocate Office estimates Child and Family Services seizes one newborn a day.
We want to be able to look after our own children, and we want to be able to have the supports in place to do that and not have our children placed with non-Indigenous families.
Meanwhile, on the same day, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs signed an agreement with the federal government, which aims to help First Nations gain more control over the child welfare system. AMC Grand Chief Arlen Dumas says the signing is just the first step.
What it will eventually translate into is reinvigorating our jurisdiction over our children.
He adds Manitoba could set the stage for child welfare, but only if the province works collaboratively with First Nations.
Instead of taking that opportunity to work with us in a meaningful way, they're arbitrarily going to go and change, the guardianship issues in this province without consulting, and thereby making it even harder to bring families together, to reunite children with their families.
APTN reached out to Minister of Families Scott Fielding. In a statement, he says the province's main priority is reforming the child welfare system, with an emphasis on keeping kids in their home communities. He says he plans to meet with Minister Philpott in Ottawa on Monday to discuss what he calls Manitoba's ongoing crisis. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Now time for a quick break, and then we'll continue our series from Taiwan and the people of Formosa. Stay with us. Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast, starting on a soggy east coast. Snow and +2 in Halifax. Sunny and -7 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -10 under the sun in Nain. -15 in Chibougamau. +1 in Montreal. -7 in Saguenay. A dark, cloudy day in southern Ontario. -1 in Windsor, Sarnia, London, and Ottawa. Sunny and -16 in Kapuskasing, -14 in Wawa, Sioux Lookout, and Big Trout Lake. Another chilly day on the way for Churchill and a high of -21. -8 in Barons River, 0 in Dauphin, -6 for Winnipeg. Over to Saskatchewan and a mild and sunny day, +7 in Swift Current, +4 in Estevan. A sunny +3 in Meadow Lake, +1 in La Ronge. Welcome back. From Europeans in the 17th century to Japanese and Chinese in more recent times, the indigenous peoples of Taiwan have been subject to an unceasing wave of colonialism, yet they've still maintained their culture and languages. But how much longer can they persevere? Tom Fenario went to Taiwan to find out. Here's the second part of his series, The People of Formosa.
This Bayan man is proclaiming victory. A traditional ceremony, this prideful performance usually occurs after a battle is won. But in this instance, it's a part of the opening ceremonies of the 2017 International Austronesian Conference. The gathering brings together indigenous people from Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as one Abenaki from the Odanak First Nation in Quebec.
As I've gone around the world over these past 15 years, meeting with other indigenous peoples in various situations, what is astounding is the similarity of our experiences.
I also want to acknowledge that I am on indigenous territory.
As CEO of APTN, Jean LaRose was invited here to speak on a media panel. One issue raised that struck a chord with him: the race to save Taiwan's indigenous languages from extinction.
While they haven't had a residential school experience per se, they have been integrated and forced into a mainstream education system that is not at all friendly to their languages. And most of them have communities that have as few language speakers as we do in Canada.
Taiwan has a population of about 23 million and growing, on an island smaller than Nova Scotia. The 16 recognized indigenous tribes make up 2.3% of the population, about 530,000 people. The risk of being assimilated into larger Chinese culture is very real.
The longer we wait to really save our language, the more people move to urban area, the more indigenous peoples are connected with modernity. They, of course, during this course of time, they change. And I think the challenge is, how do we hold on to what we used to be, the tradition, the language.
Yera Palama is the CEO of the foundation that runs Taiwan Indigenous Television, known as TITV. Since 2005, they've been producing news and award-winning programming in indigenous languages, and recently launched a radio station. While Palama is clearly proud of their work, she says it's getting harder to staff her programs with language speakers.
How do we maintain our identity as an ethnic media if we do not know enough about ourselves?
There appears to be some help on the way. Etienne Palush is the Minister of the Council of Indigenous Peoples, the arm of the government that deals with indigenous issues. Palush, who is a part of the Amis tribe, says that a recently passed law will promote indigenous languages.
We have been dedicating to the promoting of this bill of the indigenous language development for 12 years, and it was finally passed in the legislature this year. And it is very important that in this bill, the indigenous languages are confirmed to be the national languages of Taiwan.
The act will ask townships with significant indigenous populations to write all official documentation in their language, as well as Chinese, including road signs. The government also stepped up to help fund language centers like this one. These children are singing in the Piniu Mayan language. While this is certainly encouraging, it might not be enough. People here say the language could be extinct in 20 to 30 years. Tohima Tugal is a Piniu Mayan journalist and activist. She says the government needs to cut red tape that gets in the way of language development. One example she gives, her community of Kasavakan would like a traditional daycare where elders take care of kids and speak the language to them. But they can't, because the elders need childcare licenses to work at a daycare.
Either lose the regulation or try to find a way so our elders, our own people, can take care of our own children, and to have this environment for them to talk our languages on a daily life basis.
Togal also says government regulations interfere with other cultural practices, like hunting.
In the law, they say the indigenous peoples are allowed to hunt only for ceremonies, only for certain occasions. So we have to apply for it. So before we go hunting, we'll have to fill up an application and tell them, okay, how many deers we will get, how many pigs we will get, but who knows? Because it's not something that we will go for like, okay, 5 deers, then 5 deers. It's something given by our ancestors.
Regulations aside, the Piniu Mayan community of Kasavakan is doing its best to take language and culture preservation into its own hands. Hereditary Chief Hakudu Malades picked up carving at the age of 48 in order to promote culture. Now his carvings depicting everyday Piniu Mayan life and legends decorate the village.
当然，我们身为一个原住民，当然也要找回我们自己，祖灵的这个尊严。我希望大家能够守住自己的文化，永远的去追视我们的祖先，让我们的子子孙孙。
With language revitalization and youth taking back traditional hunting practices, it would appear that many here want to follow their ancestors.
What really struck me here, as is striking us in Canada now, is the encouragement and the positive sense that a lot of young people have that it can be recaptured.
The Bayan ceremony is calling the animals to the guns of the men. In essence, they're asking for a bountiful hunt. But back then, instead of asking for permits from the government, they were requesting guidance from their ancestors. Now more than ever, it would appear that the indigenous peoples of Formosa will continue to take that approach. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Taiwan.
Some amazing woodwork. Great work by Tom Fenario. A prominent leader and former chief has passed away. We'll look back on the life of Leonard George after this quick break. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast. Picking back up in northern Alberta. Sun is out in Peace River and a high of +6. Another warm day in southern Alberta, +13 in Calgary, 8 above in Edmonton and Lethbridge. A wet day on the west coast, rain, and 12 in Tofino. Showers in Port Hardy and a high of 9. Rain for Sandspit and Prince Rupert with a high of +10, +1 in Dease Lake. Mild day in parts of Yukon, +4 in Whitehorse. Over to NWT and a high of +3 in Fort Liard, +6 in Trout Lake. Another frosty day in Sax Harbor, sunny and -24, -16 in Polituck. In Nunavut, -26 in Arviat and Baker Lake, -29 in Cambridge Bay, -20 in Igloolik, -21 in Resolute. Welcome back. To many, Cindy Gladue may be the face of injustice for Indigenous women victims of sexual violence. APTN Investigates Melissa Ridgen looked into her case earlier this fall, and her episode of APTN Investigates airs tonight. Here's a preview. And warning, there's some graphic content.
Barton and Cindy went to his room. Walking in here at 12:42 a.m. on June 21st, 2011 was the last time she was seen alive.
Edmonton 911 emergency for police, fire, or ambulance?
Police, please.
And what's the emergency?
It's a long story. I woke up. There's a girl in my bathroom friggin' covered in blood.
Okay, so she needs an ambulance then, sir?
I don't know. I've touched her. She came in. I was in a hotel, and we're all partying that, and she came back and had a shower, and I fell asleep on my bed, and I woke up this morning, she's laying in the tub with blood all over the place.
Barton was patched over to police dispatch.
Do you know if she's breathing or anything? I didn't even want to touch her. I just poked her in her stomach a couple times today. Wake up! What are you doing?
Yeah.
What's going on?
And she's covered in blood?
Yeah, like the tub's covered in blood and everything.
Oh. Okay.
An autopsy showed the Cree mother, daughter, and friend died of a horrific injury, revealing an 11-centimeter slice inside her vagina. She slowly bled to death. During one of the police interviews in the days to follow, Barton was told the surveillance footage shows he lied to 911. Barton eventually admitted he did know the woman who died in his bathtub, but he insisted he didn't know what killed her. It was an act of God, he said. Barton was charged with first-degree murder. Tony Blake covered the 2015 trial for the Edmonton Sun.
If someone kills someone while committing a sexual assault, which was what the Crown's allegation, it's first-degree murder.
You can see the full story tonight after the APTN News. Leonard George, a leader and former chief of his community in North Vancouver, has passed away. APTN's Tina House has more.
Charlene Alec and Reuben George are singing a traditional song for their late uncle, Chief Leonard George. The well-respected elder passed away suddenly earlier this week at the age of 71.
He would want us to carry on, and just the way he had fought hard and was that peaceful warrior right up to the last minute.
Chief Leonard George is the son of the late Chief Dan George and his wife Amy. At an early age, he followed in his dad's famous footsteps and got involved in film and television with a memorable role in Smoke Signals. But despite his success as an actor, his heart was with his people. He was elected as chief of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation for 3 terms. His vision helped the community create a real estate development company called Takaya Developments. It oversees the building of multi-million-dollar condos on Tsleil-Waututh traditional land.
We went down to under 2% unemployment rate, and that's his legacy.
Leonard beat stage 4 cancer 3 times throughout his life, and always by his side was his loving wife Sue and their 3 boys. Chief Leonard George will be laid to rest in his home community of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. He will be forever remembered for his wisdom, kind heart, and brilliant mind. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
And that is your APTN National News for this Friday. Tune in on Sunday for APTN National News Weekend. Investigates is up next. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.